I want to switch over to Europe really quickly here because the European Central Bank meeting is on Thursday. What might we expect to hear from Mario Draghi on QE? Because if he doesn't extend the program, it could be construed by investors as tightening.
I think so, and the language will be important. The press conference will be important. It always is. I think ultimately investors have to expect, because the ECB is running out of bonds to buy, that the quantitative easing program will be reduced, if not eliminated at some point. I mean, the market to a certain extent has already begun to anticipate that. Instead of $15 trillion worth of negative yielding bonds in Euroland, we now have 2 or 3 trillion, and so yields have gone up in the EU by 30 or 40 basis points, almost as much as they've gone up in the United States. So, the real world is coming back to bear in terms of these central bank policies that stressed negative interest rates that ultimately, in my view, and I think in central bankers' view, maybe even in Draghi's view, are deleterious to economic growth as opposed to positive.
Do you think the Italian referendum changes how Mario Draghi moves forward with policy?
Well, I think he suggested beforehand that whatever it takes in terms of a potential negative reaction in terms of Italian bonds, that it was a 5 or 10 basis point moment, but not much. I think the most important thing, obviously, are the situations with the Italian banks and the stance that the EU and the ECB jointly take in terms of potentially bailing them out. In any case, it's not a positive for the Italian economy. It's merely a smooth over palliative that I think covers up lots of problems in Italy and perhaps in other countries as well that have non-performing loans that simply can't be dismissed and swept under the rug.
Right. Now, we mentioned earlier the supply of bonds out there in the European context. Let's bring it back to the United States. Steve Mnuchin, who is Donald Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary, floated the idea of selling longer-dated treasuries to cushion the effect of rising interest rates. What do you think of this proposal?
Well, I think it's a good idea. It was a better idea 40 basis points ago, but those are short-term considerations. To the extent that a country tries to match its liabilities, those being the bonds, with its assets, that being the longevity of the country, which in the United States is a 50, 100, 200 centuries, long type of proposition, then all the better, because it locks in a low rate of financing and gives investors perhaps a choice for a higher yielding treasury as opposed to a lower yielding treasury, and it to a certain extent allows investors to move out on a yield curve if they think that interest rates aren't moving up very much. I myself wouldn't be a buyer of a 50 or 100-year treasury unless it offered an extreme reward in terms of a higher yield, but we'll have to see over the next 6 months, right?
Can you quantify what you mean by an extreme higher yield?
Well, what's the markup in terms of the 10s and 30s? Probably about 70 or 80 basis points. What would be the markup between a 30 and a 50 or a 30 and a 100? We get some type of idea in terms of the foreign markets. I would say that there should be at least a 40 to 50 basis point premium on a longer term issue. It would carry a duration, if 50 years or if 100 years of a significantly higher proportion relative to a 10 or even to a 30. So an investor would have to be cautious and therefore demand that type of reward for the maturity extension.